And so now I'm going to very briefly introduce our guest for tonight, who, if you haven't seen or noticed already, is Madge Evers. And Madge uses foraged plants and fungi to explore decomposition and regeneration. Best known for her spore prints, Madge's practice involves photography, including the cyanotype process, and she is going to talk us through all of that tonight. Over to you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Dale, and thank you to the Halide Project for having me tonight, and thanks everyone for joining in. I want to say, what I'd like to do is I'll talk a little bit, and then I'll pause at times. If you have questions, you can throw them into the chat. And also want to say I'm here in Massachusetts, the land of the Wampanoag, Connecticut River Valley people, so just want to say that. And so I thought I would just begin sort of with how I became interested in photography, which it has a kind of the story is from long ago. And then I'll start my slideshow after I give you my little spiel about the past. When I was in high school, I was interested in art, and I took photography classes and art classes. But when it came time to move on, I just wasn't really sure. I didn't think about even going to art school, because I just thought, well, how does a person make a living as an artist? I didn't realize that there were different ways of being an artist in the world, and it just seemed like I need to figure out a way to make a living. So I went to college and I studied English, and in between my sophomore and junior years, I did a 3-month black and white program at the Maine Photographic Workshop, now called Maine Media. And at the time, it was analog photography. This was 1981. And so I did the basic black and white 3-month program. And it was really wonderful and interesting, and had great teachers, and I produced a body of work. I created a portfolio. The thing is that at the time when I looked at that portfolio, I was like, oh, I didn't feel, people weren't like clamoring over me saying, oh my God, this is like the most amazing work. And so I just thought, well, this is okay, but I'm not really sure. Instead of thinking that what I'm doing here is I'm exploring ideas and feelings, and it's just, the beginning of that. I just really had a hard time seeing myself as, this is a path, and you follow the path and you just keep working at it, instead of like, oh, I'm a talented artist, and so I'm going to be famous. It was really hard for me to kind of reconcile those ideas. So I went back to college. I got my degree in English, and I always took pictures and always tried to find a dark room somewhere to work in. But I didn't see how to make photography my life. And after a series of very uninspiring jobs, in the mid 80s, I moved to New York City to become a photographer's assistant, because I thought, well, maybe I'll be a commercial photographer, and maybe that's a thing that I could do. And so I worked for commercial photographers for 2 years, folks that did still life photography and portrait photography. And the thing is that when I was there, I learned a ton, and it was really interesting, but I felt like, wow, these people are so confident and have so much chutzpah, and I don't. And how am I going to be a commercial photographer when I just don't have the confidence to do that? So I decided, well, I like children, and I studied English, and I like books, and I like talking about books and ideas. So I decided to become a photographer and a teacher. And so I moved to Providence, Rhode Island, and I did that. It wasn't like instant. It took me a few years for that to realize that goal. But along the way, I took pictures, always looking for the dark room. And so I'm actually going to begin my slideshow now. And I'm not, oh, let's see. Sorry, y'all.
You click from beginning. Did that work?
I did click from beginning, but
Try again.
okay. Oh, there we go.
Okay, cool.
So when I was living in Providence, you know, I found a dark room. I worked in a dark room, and I this is from a series of work I did that was based on my niece and nephew, and who they're now 40 and 38. So you can see that these are pretty old photographs. And one reason that I'm sharing them tonight is because I think it's kind of interesting how, you know, what is the connection between this work and the work that I'm doing now? And I think there is a connection, but I couldn't, you know, I think it has to do with change and growth and regeneration. That's kind of how I see this. And so, you know, so when I became a teacher, and then I became a parent, and I became a gardener, and all of those things took up my creative energy, and I put my creative energy there, and I stopped taking pictures. I really just didn't take pictures. And during that time, digital photography emerged, and so, and now I actually think we're all photographers because of the ubiquity of phones. But you know, I really put it aside for a long time. And then in 2015, I cultivated beds of mushrooms in my yard. And so when the mushrooms came up, I did that in April of 2015. When the mushrooms came up in September, you know, you can see them here. They never pop up. They come up not only in the bed, but then they come up everywhere else too. I made a spore print to identify the mushroom, just to make sure that I wasn't going to feed my family mushrooms that were, for, you know, poisonous or something. And I had familiarity with the spore print because my husband and I would forage for mushrooms, and a spore print is one way to identify mushrooms. And it's as simple as taking a mushroom and putting it gill side down on paper, and it releases its spores over 8 or 10 or 12 hours. And different mushroom species have different colored spores. So this is just a photo of a spore print that I made with mushrooms that I grew. And you can see that in this case there, so this is the mushroom, and it's, you know, 5 inches across. It started here, and you can see my cursor, right, Dale? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And you know, and in each iteration, the mushroom released some of its spores, but in different ways based on the air current that's blowing around or the temperature of the room, you know. And so I find it fascinating that this is all the same mushroom, but very different images. And so when I made the first spore print with the mushrooms that I grew, it just, everything from the past in terms of art making and image making just really clicked. And I decided, wow, I really want to experiment and see what happens, because this is kind of blowing me away here. So I just got nice cotton paper and I started experimenting. And so this is one of the first ones that I made that I was like, oh my God. So it was, and this is about 8 by 8 inches. And so it's photographic, but it's also very abstract. And then it's got the sort of smoky quality of the spores. And then you also have these lines are made by worms that hatch in the gills of mushrooms and then move along the page. So it's fauna and fungi, and it really kind of spoke to my experience as a gardener and as a person that walks in the woods, and my obsession with composting. It just all kind of made sense to me. And so this image and then this image are from the same mushroom, but just a different iteration. And also, again, 8 by 8 inches. And so once I made these, I was like, wow. And I just started experimenting. And so one of the things about the spore prints is that they're fragile. Yes, the spores are very powdery, and they can, how do you adhere them to the paper? I started with these. I use an archival fixative, but they still have a very fragile quality. And I was often like, how do you preserve these? And one question that people are curious about, well, spore prints as art, so how archival is it? And the truth is that I don't know. I mean, I have these. I still have, actually, these originals, and these are from 2015. So I still have them. They're intact. And I, but I don't know. I can't answer that. It's an experimental thing. And so it makes me say, okay, well, it made me say, I'm going to photograph the images to preserve them. And then I also was kind of curious about, other ways of preserving them. So in this case, I made photo intaglio prints. I took a class and I did it. I think the image is pretty good and pretty true to the original. But I think that I might go back to that at some point, but it's a very different process than photography, and it's a very different process than spore printing. And as I talk about cyanotypes later too, it's a very different process than cyanotypes. So I did experiment with that, and it's kind of interesting, but I wasn't convinced, like, okay, this is how I can preserve these images. And so, photography has been the best way to do that. So I'm just going to share some more of those first images that I made over the first, from 2015, 2016, and 2017. And I was really fascinated with sort of the different iterations. So this is the same mushroom, but in different forms in some ways, I guess you could say. And I started also doing where I was, spraying with an archival fixative and then kind of scraping away some of the spores to like excavate and see it. And so this I call hueso, but because I feel like you get sort of the bones of the mushroom, if you will. I mean, I guess mushrooms don't have bones, but again, more just the iterations of the same exact mushroom, but just moving around the page. This one I think is a really good example. You can really see clearly the marks of the worms. So again, the same mushroom that I moved around the page, but those worms really cruising through the spores. So I'm just going to stop here for a minute just to see if there are any questions or comments.
If anyone has questions, you can pop them into the chat and I'll relay them to Madge.
Oh yeah, and I actually see that there are no questions in the chat, so I can just like keep going.
Okay.
And so far, these are all mushrooms that I grew. This one is 22 by 30 inches. Big mushrooms, big mushrooms. The mushrooms are garden giant or King Stropharia, and they grow quite large. And you can grow them pretty easily in the garden with wood chips and like layered with cardboard. And people eat them. I mean, they're okay. They're fine, but they're much better for spore printing. So then I started kind of wanting to control the narrative a little bit. So I started using paper as a stencil, right, to control where the spores fell. And so again, this is a big one. This is 22 by 30. This seemed appropriate in 2018, the decay of the flag. And then in 2018, something changed, which is that the mushrooms in my yard stopped producing. And so, and I can't tell you why. I kept putting more wood chips where in the gardens where I thought they should be, but they stopped. And, I think of mushrooms as being pretty intelligent, and maybe they just were tired of being, the plaything of an artist, or I'm not really sure, but they stopped. And so I started foraging in the woods for mushrooms. And so and the mushrooms that I was finding, in this case, these are these are oyster mushrooms. They produce white spores. And so I started using black paper. But also in 2018, instead of the stenciling that I had been doing, I started using plants as stencils. And and that kind of changed everything for me in terms of the work became more integrated with what I was really interested in terms of gardening and composting and the growing cycles of plants. And so I started using the plants, and finding it compelling for sure. I really liked the plants, and when I do this, I'm doing multiple layers. In this case, I did a stencil of a tree, and then on top of that, I did stencils with the ferns. And so here's a little video that shows the process. It's very straightforward. It's as simple as I just collect plants, I press them, then I collect mushrooms. I take the pressed plants and I put them on paper. I put the mushrooms on top, and then I often, do multiple layers. So in this case, this is probably the third layer, and these are wild grape that I collected at the Arnold Arboretum, and I can tell this is the third layer, and probably the final layer. But I do a layer, and then I move things around, and so it takes several days to create the image, but it's very straightforward. And sometimes it's, you get the beautiful patterns, and sometimes you get the smoky, spores falling everywhere, and sometimes you get like a wet blob of a million bugs, and so it's always exciting. It's always a surprise. I don't know exactly what's going to happen, and so it is exciting in that way. Oops. So in 2019, I was applying for a show at the Emily Dickinson Museum, and I was researching Emily Dickinson, and I found her herbarium that she created when she was 14 years old. And it's online at one of the Harvard libraries. You just Google Emily Dickinson herbarium. And I was really struck by this idea that Emily Dickinson and I were exploring the same plants, the exact same plants, different iterations of the plants in the same area in the Pioneer Valley. And yet, and the plants transcend time. And I loved, so so to create an herbarium, there are different ways to do it, but to make her herbarium, Emily, she just collected plants, pressed them, and then glued them into a notebook. And then she would write down the Latin name, or, and then where she found it. And her handwriting was very sweet and delicate. And so that's one way to make an herbarium. An herbarium is a collection of plants. Sometimes it's in drawers. Most universities have herbarium collections. And there are also fungariums where you collect fungi, and they keep them in drawers or whatever. I mean, there's just ways to collect everything for science and for art. So when I saw Emily's herbarium, I was like, I could make an herbarium. I have plants. I can collect plants. I find plants everywhere I go. So I decided, but I will depict the plants with mushroom spores instead of by pasting them down, or instead of photographing them, or so this is my first herbarium image. And so a lot of ferns, but also here is cleavers, one of my favorite plants. Here's black cohosh, tansy, yarrow, rue, just a little bit of everything here. And so this was the first one that I made. And this is on 20 by 28 inch paper. I like this one, but then I just felt it was too light, like the gray, it wasn't giving the drama that I was, hoping for. So I started, this is how I started this series, and the series is ongoing. I continue with it because when I go places, I'll collect plants and make an image specific to a place. And it's extremely satisfying for me to make herbaria images. There's something about it. It's very grounding, I guess. And the herbaria images also, speak to ideas about photosynthesis, and which is the foundation of life on this planet, and ironically the foundation of the oil that we extract from the ground too, and burn, and also the idea that plants and mushrooms have a symbiotic relationship called mycorrhiza, where they're communicating underground by sharing information and nutrients. And so the images that I started creating all kind of speak to those things. And that's why I love them and enjoy making them. And Dale, you can just let me know if there's any questions. I'm happy to answer questions, but I also can, keep going.
Yeah, I'll keep an eye on the chat. I'll let you know if
Okay.
anyone puts
Thank
anything in
you.
there.
Also in 2019, when I started the herbaria imagery, I had a ton of pressed plants. And so I remembered from long ago in the 80s, I remember one of the photographers I worked for made cyanotypes. And I was like, oh gosh, it must be so hard and complicated. And but in 2019, there's just like Google, and I could find the answer like this. And I found, wow, it's actually so not complicated. I can have the materials, I can get them in a few days. And I had all this paper, and I had all these pressed plants. And I just was able to start making cyanotypes very quickly. And like the mushroom spore prints, I just kind of jumped in and began experimenting, and and finding immediate gratification with the cyanotypes. That is one thing I find about cyanotypes, is that they're very satisfying. The whole process is very engaging and very analog, which I like. So I started making cyanotypes, and it was kind of exciting to me to be like, okay, well, because there's something besides the mushrooms. It's not only it's not only mushrooms. So Sometimes I would take an old spore print and I just like paint cyanotype on it, and then cyanotype over it. I think this one is an old spore print. Um, and then I was like, wow, I could make spore prints on top of cyanotypes. And so very meta. And so I did that. I still do that sometimes. So here's a cyanotype. Here's it with the spores. I just think with the spores, it really is interesting. It's more dramatic for sure. This, using stencily kind of things. And this was like right in the midst of COVID. So I was freaking out, as we all were. And I also started using stencils and making imagery where I cut out a stencil and kind of painted the cyanotype on. So then in 2020, I found this I found a bunch of medium format negatives in my mother's papers. And so this is a picture of my mother and my grandfather in New Jersey in probably like 1932. And so I was so thrilled that I was able to make a contact print. It was, and then I also have a photograph of my mother, like her high school picture. The negative was in with that group of negatives. And there were some other negatives that didn't really pan out, but it was so exciting to connect with the past. Whereas, if I had found those negatives, if I hadn't had the cyanotype process in mind, I just would have been like, oh, this is interesting, but it wouldn't have occurred to me that I could do anything with it. I would have looked at it, and kind of wondered, but I just was able to make an image. So, obviously this is enlarged. It's, it's not that big. They're probably like 2 by 3 inches, but they're big enough. They're big enough to really get this feeling that it's I don't know. I mean, I just feel like so much of art is about connection, and this connection with my mother and my grandfather is just like, I don't know. I really love this. And I also had my negatives too, but my negatives were like 35 millimeter and maybe a little bit larger format. Like I had a Mamiya 645, so like a little bit bigger. And I have worked with them, but they're a little bit small. So, I started working with that. Here's that a different image, a different negative, and I don't even know who that person is. But I know that that's my mother. And then this image is of a garden and my grandparents, which you can't really see it well, but it's just like and then I remembered, my grandparents liked to garden and my mother never gardened. And I love to garden. And it's just like, wow, that connection was so palpable. And I just wouldn't, I think I would have forgotten about that if I hadn't found these negatives. So that was really exciting to me. The cyanotype dress is always kind of fun. So now I actually want to talk about the new herbarium a little bit more in depth, and show some of the images from the new herbarium, and then the cyanotypes that I made with them, and have talk about that a little bit. So this is an image I made in 2019, and I had the good fortune, really lucky, to go to Alaska. And so when I was there, I just collected plants, and so I made this image with plants from Alaska. I didn't, it was during it was the hottest temperature on record in Alaska that year in 2019. And there were fires where we were on the Kenai Peninsula. And there were very few mushrooms. Apparently, there's tons of mushrooms in Alaska, but that not in 2019 when I was there. So I took the plants home, and then I made the spore print at home. So here's a spore print that I made, and again, 20 by 28 inches, and depicts bleeding heart, rue, wild mustard, and that's it. So I photographed these images, and then I took the digital file and I made a digital negative. And so I want to talk about that a little bit. I'm not going to talk about the technical aspects because the only way that I did it was that I was taking a class and we were learning how to make digital negatives. I took a class in cyanotype and paper making at Penland, and they taught us how to do this. And so I don't have a Mac. I don't even have Photoshop. I just, but at Penland, there's a beautiful lab. And so I was able to, use the lab and follow the directions. And I made several digital negatives. And so, because I was really curious about how these would translate as cyanotypes. And so this image is 8 by 10. It's on this really nice burger paper. And the thing that I realized about these cyanotypes of spore prints is that making the cyanotype for me is just the handmade process is what appeals to me. So getting the nice paper, mixing up the chemistry, coating the paper, making sure that it dries nicely, exposing the paper, washing it, drying it. I mean, all of those things are just very hands-on. And also, of course, for those of you that make cyanotypes, the emergence of the image, and it's I'm not saying it's like making a spore print at all, but there's just something that is akin to the spore printing that I liken it to. I don't know. There's just something about it that I really like. And when I first made these, I wasn't sure I liked them. I wasn't totally convinced. And when you see them together, it's like, wow, they're really different, right? And the digital file, right, of the spore print it's more dramatic, but I don't know. And I'd love to know what people think, like, what they prefer, the original spore print or the cyanotype. I also feel like the cyanotype is kind of more accessible in a way. And maybe a little less haunting. I'm not sure if that's the case. So yeah. And I definitely had trouble with the exposure. Making it the exposure with these cyanotypes, it's a lot harder than with sort of a straight photograph, because if it's too dark, then it kind of loses something. So I struggle with the exposure on these. But this one definitely could be a little darker, I think. And I see that there is something in the chat. So I'm going to just stop for a second in case.
I think it's just a comment from Madison saying that they love the paint marks. So the brush strokes, the brush marks of the cyanotype.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's another part of cyanotype that I love is that, is that you can get those, put that painterly quality on there, or I don't know, the gesture almost. I like that a lot. So in my opinion, this one doesn't translate as well to a cyanotype. And I'm not exactly sure why. Um, I think it might be that there's a lot of dark space that, I don't know. And you see, I made this one huge because it's my favorite. So, um,
Hey, Madge, I have a quick question.
sure.
In this spore print, and I noticed there was one much earlier on, there's a little bit of orange.
Oh, yep.
Like it's primarily, blacks and grays, black and white and grays, gray tones. But then it has
Yeah.
that little bit of orange. Do you know what that's coming from?
Yes. So different mushroom species have different colored spores. So, in these are dryad saddle mushrooms, but that orangey salmon pinkish color, those I think are what are called deer mushrooms. So, yeah, it's a different species. So sometimes there'll be some brown in there. That's the mushroom spores will be brown or green. Apparently there's some oyster mushrooms that have lilac colored spores. I haven't found those yet, but that would be super cool.
Okay, thanks.
Again, I'm not even sure. I think if it was darker, I don't know. I don't know. I find the exposure kind of tough. And this one's a little darker, and I think it looks fine. I think that when there's enough white um, to balance it out. But it's a really different image with the cyanotype. And so that's that spore print in process. Just when I was making the spore print. And I will say that when I make spore prints, I do it in my garage or, because if not, there's a lot of bugs involved. And when I used to do it inside, it was kind of a big mess. So I do it outside so that the bugs don't take over. So yeah, you can see right there, that's like a little bit of a light brownish color mushroom. I think these are transposed, so that's a little bit backwards there. So this one has a lot of, oops, those kind of salmon colored mushrooms. I think that's kind of it for those, for those cyanotypes. I'm just wondering if there are any questions.
If anybody has questions, you can pop them into the chat. Is does your slideshow continue? Is this a
Yes, it does.
pause?
It does continue.
Okay, so I think you can go.
Okay. Oops. You know what? Now it's kind of doing its thing there. So
wait,
the next.
wait, hold on. I spoke too soon. We do have a question.
Okay.
Madison's wondering if you want to explore with new plants / items / etc.
Oh yeah. I mean, I the thing that I like to do is if I go someplace to find, to interact with the landscape and collect plants in different places. So I don't know about other objects, but definitely other plants. And I don't know if I have that some of the images, but some, so like for example, this image is yeah, this is a dandelion, and one of my favorites. So cleavers and dandelions are among my favorite plants. And something that I started doing was, just focusing on one group of plants, like one kind of plant, and trying to depict that. So that's kind of fun, because then again, to see this, that iterative process of plants where they all are the same, but they're all different. I think that's a very interesting aspect to plants. So here it's just, this is just a spore print on pink paper. And again, this is like probably one of those deer mushrooms, but I think that it kind of is dramatic because of the pink paper. And I'm going to show you some cyanotypes that I am working on that are very large, and I'll just talk about those a little bit. So, oops, sorry, I don't have control. So this is a 3 foot by 4 foot cyanotype that I collaged bluebirds onto, and then I started painting because I felt like I wanted to add something to it. I wanted to kind of, I don't know, just bring it into this other realm that was not just blue. And this is a fern, and then I don't, if at the top of my screen, are you seeing all that bar with all the info on it? Is that showing? Oh, good. All right. I started working with plants that are, some people call them invasive. I call them opportunistic. I mean, these are plants that were brought here, by humans, and they just are doing their thing, and they might be crowding out other plants, but they're just, they didn't do the invading. They're just being themselves. So in these images, I depict an opportunistic plant, and then more indigenous plants, and then birds as well, because I love birds. So this is more of that same. So this is Artemisia, which is opportunistic, and echinacea and ferns and chervil, and these are Arctic terns, which are amazing birds. But again, making these 3 foot by 4 foot cyanotypes, and then collaging elements and painting elements. That's just kind of a close-up of that. I'm just working on it. This is bindweed, and if anyone out there is a gardener, you know bindweed. But it's a really beautiful plant. And bindweed this is black cohosh and dragonflies. This is rue, and the leaves, these leaves are Norway maple, which is an opportunistic tree that does really well here and crowds out others. Ferns and some grasses and bluebirds. And then this is just like this really weird one that it's got the multiflora rose, and then it has some poppies, and then I did some spore printing on it, and then I did some pastel. I kind of threw everything at that one. I'm not sure about it. It's still kind of in process. I'm not really sure. And I think that kind of might be, I think that's the end of my slideshow, although I certainly could show other images if people wanted to see anything else.
Well, I think we can open it up to questions. If people have questions, you can put them into the chat, continue doing that. Or if you want to use the raise hand function, you can click on that and I'll see it and I'll let you turn your mic on if you want to ask the questions with your voice instead of your typing fingers. Yeah, no, that was great. I was thinking earlier on where you were kind of doubling up the cyanotype and the spore print, how you were kind of introducing some like tonality other than blue, like into the cyanotypes. And then all of that layering, it made me think of surrealism, like the various layers, it kind of lends a depth to a two-dimensional image that just kind of brings you in and out. So that was really interesting.
Yeah, and I think that the spore prints are, when I make spore prints, it's kind of like that in the layering. I try to, sometimes it's just one layer, but sometimes it's the multiple layers, which makes it very interesting and hard to kind of get what it is. I have some work at a show right now in Boston. I'm a member of Kingston Gallery, and so we had our opening, and people are just like, I have spore prints up, and people are just, it's really hard for people to wrap their heads around it. Like, what is this? Is this a photogram? Is this, what is happening here? Because I say it's mushroom spores on paper, but I do think I need to have like a video there so people can see what is going on, because it's, I think, really, it's unusual. It's a strange thing for sure.
Have you done, I guess the cyanotype, when you're combining an exposure and a spore print at once, do you do that? Like, do you do any kind of photogram with the spore prints, like while they're sporing?
No, because the spores are, the spores are alive, and if they're super delicate and they can't get wet. And the paper that I use, it's not photographic paper. It's just watercolor paper or pastel paper. Yeah. I think the work is being very about randomness in a way. Like, so sure, I might construct the composition a little bit, but the mushrooms are, they're releasing their spores, and there's so much randomness in it, like where it's going to land, what's going to happen, that that's kind of appealing to me, that, because every time I like right now I have spore prints out in the garage, and it is really fun to go out there and see, like, so what's happening, lifting them up and find out.
So with the combo ones, you're doing the cyanotype first and then spore printing on top of those.
Yeah, and I usually, so I find that in order for the spores to adhere to a cyanotype, I put, you could do different things, but like I put a little pumice gel down, because then it's like sandy and the spores will adhere, and it doesn't obscure the image if I do that. I think that's kind of what I've done a lot with those cyanospores. That's what I'm calling them for now.
I like them. I like the tonality to them. Yeah, and like introducing that different tonality into like a monochromatic cyanotype, when you start to get like these different tones and colors from the spore print. I like that.
Right.
And again, that layering, I really like those.
It would be fun to do it with those, with not white spored mushrooms, but ones that have pink or the salmon colors. That would be pretty fun to do that onto a cyanotype.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one thing I did do is with a couple of the uh, digital negatives of the spore prints, there were two that I was like, I don't really love these. So I doubled them up and I made a cyanotype, and I actually liked that better. It had that more like layered quality that was like, huh, what's going on here? You could really see the patterns, but it was, the abstract, it was very abstract. So that kind of worked.
Yeah, I feel like I could, if there was one on the wall, I could spend like hours just trying to make my way through it,
Yeah, right.
visually, because of all the layers that are like additive. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, I don't want to be the only one asking questions, but if anybody else has any questions, put them into the chat. Also, we get a transcript. I could print out a transcript of the chat. So if anybody has anything that they want to say to Madge, it's not necessarily a question, but a comment about the work that you would want to share with her. I could share the transcript of the chat with her afterwards. So feel free to put comments in there as well as questions. And again, you could do the raise hand function if you want to do that and ask the question with your mouth instead of your hands. But we are right around 8 o'clock. So if nobody has questions, Catherine, enjoyed listening and your enthusiasm. Yes, you kept saying that you loved things and you love what you're discovering and working on. So that was really great to hear how much
Thank
you love
you.
what you're doing in your process and your
Thank you.
explorations too.
Yeah, it's exciting. I'm very energized by this whole experience. Thank you, Catherine.
All right. Yeah, and how it led you to work, and Catherine likes it even more as it developed. So yeah,
Right,
you're like building on your ideas, but also building on the results that you're getting from different things that you're experimenting with. So that's
right.
really nice to see too.
Yeah. And I think, when I introduced that idea when I was a teenager or when I was younger, and I just thought, oh, it has to be sort of fully developed. And that is just isn't how things work. Things are just constantly developing, and we're making connections all the time. So I just keep moving forward, and I encourage all people to just keep moving forward, and see what happens with whatever it is you're doing.
Awesome. All right. Thank you as well, Catherine. Thank you for everybody who attended tonight. And thank you very much, Madge, for walking us through your spore prints and your cyanotypes and your combos and experiments and everything.
My pleasure. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. It's just, I'm always so happy to share with people, and I really appreciate everyone taking the time.
Right. Well, it was our pleasure. Oh, wait. I'm going to say hold on for 1 second because it seems like Catherine is typing stuff in. Okay, so she saw the images large on her Mac. Oh, okay. So she
Oh,
initially tuned in on the phone and they
oh,
were small, and seeing them on a Mac screen where they were bigger. Now, can you imagine going from a screen to like the 20 by 28 prints? That would be amazing to see in person.
yeah.
Cool. Do you have any shows coming up? I know that you just had a
Um,
piece at
yeah, so
VCP.
I currently have the Kingston Gallery, and then I don't. I mean, let's see. I have stuff in the new year. I have things, but nothing in the fall that I don't think I have anything in the fall. So
Well, people can follow you or check your website or what have you
sure.
for
Yeah.
updates on
Yeah.
shows in 2024.
Yeah. And I have a newsletter if anyone, I have Instagram. Yes, my Instagram is spore play. Oh, type it in the chat.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, and I haven't, if you just go to madgeevers.com, I have a website as well. And I have a newsletter. Yeah. So, yep. And I try to get my work out there. It takes up like way too much time, in my opinion, but
A full-time job.
the world, right? Thanks, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out tonight.
Thanks, everybody, and thank you, Madge.
Sure,
And
my pleasure.
hopefully we'll see everybody out
Okay.
there, either in person or on the interwebs.
All right. Bye.
Good night, everyone.